Hi, I'm here with Dr. NIK, youth specialist, and this is our second part of the Adolescent Journey series. Thank you for joining us again, NIK.
Thanks, Mariana.
So, both the mother and the father play a unique role in forming identity and sense of belonging, right?
Absolutely. John Bowlby, a very famous psychologist, developed the theory of primary attachment figures. And every young child attaches themselves to somebody, and the parents are obviously the closest ones to them. Particularly in the early part of a child's life, the mother is usually the prime caregiver. And she is the one, both parents, of course, if they're both there, but even if they're both there, the mother is the one who spends a lot of time imprinting a lot of valuable messages to a young person. This is where a young person feels loved. You cannot love a young person too much. So the more warmth and love and nurture a young child gets, the better they feel about themselves and the universe. As they grow, the rules start to kick in, and it's a kind of an autocratic relationship where you have to say, get out of bed now, or go to bed, clean your teeth, tie your shoelaces up, put this back on the bench where you got it from. A lot of the basic discipline happens in very early childhood, or does not happen. But to a large extent, children see the world through the lens of their parents. It's like God talking to them. So the messages are very important in childhood. Once they hit their adolescence, which is basically the onset of puberty, the rules change a bit, and children start to push their parents away, start to distance themselves from the parents. And this is actually tough for a lot of parents. Up until their adolescence or their puberty, children will sit on their bed and they'll tell you all their deepest secrets and all their dreams and all their desires and aspirations. But once they reach their puberty and their adolescence, they actually trade their parents for their friends at school. So it's really important which friends they develop and what friendships they have at school or wherever they happen to be. And so at that point in time, the role of the father really needs to step up, and he needs to be there sending the same messages that the mother was primarily sending when they were younger. The mother, of course, still plays a very important role in adolescence, but they're looking and asking questions about their dad. Young boys are looking at their father saying, so what does it mean to be a man? If that man, their father or their uncle or their grandfather or some other primary male figure, if that person is a spiritual quality person who's praying, reading the Bible, leading out in church, involved in pathfinders or adventurers, they look at that person and they say, well, that's what it means to be a man. Young girls will be the same, thinking, I wonder what sort of a person I should marry. And they're looking at their dad and they're seeing him as a loving, caring father who says to his daughter, you're beautiful, you're a princess, you can do it, you could do anything you wanted to do. You're a rising star. And so she will look for a husband who will treat her the same way as her father. If the male figure in a young person's life, an adolescent's life, is not as caring or vacant, not around, or if they're abusive and causing pain, then the young boy is looking at that father saying, so that's what it means to be a male, a man. And the girl will be looking at him thinking, so I guess I'll marry somebody who treats me like my father does. So young girls could end up in an abusive relationship.
So it's extremely important for the parents to be very intentional on the way they build this role model for the kids.
Yes, absolutely. And to develop the trust and the communication and the closeness when they're children. And so it gets tough when children reach their adolescence. So you can trade on that like a bank account. If you've invested heavily with your children when they're small, they will love and respect you when they're in their teens. If you've neglected them when they're small, when they get to their teens, you try to discipline them and they'll look at you, well, you didn't care about me, you don't care about me, so don't try to tell me what to do with my life. This is where other supportive parents become very valuable as well. Friends, church leaders, pathfinder leaders, youth pastors, school chaplains, these people can all speak into the lives of an adolescent.
And especially because this is a time where there is experimentation and many times poor decisions. So it's extremely important to build that net of support, right?
So the tension usually rises when children reach their puberty, and the relationship gets very strained at home. because you're still trying to apply boundaries, but your leadership style has to change. You can no longer be that autocratic sort of leader. If you keep trying to push your kids down and keep them under the thumb throughout this time, you'll end up with a very angry situation, and this is where children leave home, or they'll be destructive to spite their parents sometimes. So the more care and support network we can build around an adolescent during this experimentation time, the better. So every young person needs 5 to 7 mature people around them who love them and who can speak into their lives valuable messages that they're worth something, that they're valuable, that they're loved. So there's 3 stages of adolescence. Early adolescence is when they're pushing away from their parents. Mid-adolescence, which is 14 through sort of 18, they are the centre of the universe. Everything revolves around them. And then late adolescence, early adulthood is where sort of 18, 19 into their 20s, they start to come home. So the good news is they're pushing parents away when they're in their early adolescence. In their late adolescence, they suddenly wake up one day and say, you know, my actual parents are not as bad as I thought they were. And they start to come back home again and actually journey with you again. Reconnecting, but in a different way, as your friends, more so than just as a subordinate. And that's very important to understand. It's good news at the end of the journey for parents if you can hang in there through the journey.
Now, speaking on those times when they are more likely to experiment and even break some rules, how to best deal with it?
So this is a tough time, and there are no pat answers, but there are some messages that we can send young people when they are experimenting or when they are pushing the boundaries. The message needs to be that we still love them, that we are there for them. We may not agree with what they're doing, but the big picture is that they are so valuable to us that we need to let them know that we care about them and we love them. This gets very awkward, particularly when it comes to the church. Ideally, the church is there to support young people and to be a network for them and to help them through. Oftentimes, when a young person is exhibiting problematic behaviour, and that could be in Adventist context, it could be, smoking, drinking, lifestyle matters that we kind of don't agree with. What often happens is that people will distance themselves from a young person who is exhibiting that kind of behaviour. And there's lots of ways we can let a young person know they're not welcome. Without saying a word, we can just ease back and keep away and not talk to them, just happen to walk past them at church. That's the easiest option, not the best option. The most valuable option is to talk to that person, or even if they're not attending church anymore, but to Facebook them or message them somehow and text them and let them know, hey, I know maybe church is not making sense for you right now, but I want you to know I care about you and I'm there for you. So if you're in trouble on a Friday night in town, ring me up at any time. I'll come and pick you up from town myself.
That is how the church should respond.
Because God actually loves them just as much when they're out there than as when they're sitting in church well behaved with good clothes on. He is out there after them when they're out there.
Exactly.
And we need to be the ones who let them know God still cares about them. This is a tough time for the church, and it's easier just to let them go, but we need to look after our adolescents are more valuable than the sins they're committing.
This is extremely important
Yes.
to highlight that. And talking about mentoring, there is also a mentoring role of church and parents as well.
Yes. Now, mentoring doesn't happen on one weekend. It doesn't happen on a leadership training weekend. You can't pick up that skills in a weekend. You have to journey with an adolescent for 6-8 years while they're going through the rough and tumble of that adolescent journey. And so they're looking for reference points that are solid and stable. And so every young person needs 5 to 7 adults or mature Christian people who are there for them. And the rarest commodity today is a Christian adult male. We have more women than men in the church. Beautiful, we love them all, but we really need those men as well to be standing there beside an adolescent when they're going through their journey. Very important.
So what is your takeaway message that parents and also the church could bring home?
I think the fact is that we need to be looking at the long-term journey of a young person, that seeing adolescence as just a phase that young people are going through They're not necessarily going to make it tidy and clean, squeaky clean. Things can get messy. Things may not work out the way you want them to. They could end up in a courtroom. They could end up pregnant. They could end up with tattoos all over themselves or piercings. Not that they're the grievous sins, but the bottom line is things may not look the way you want them to, but you must understand that that soul, that person who is going on that journey needs to know God loves them and we love them despite those things. I will say something about values as well. Often we argue when rules are broken. We ostracise people when the rules are broken. But we need to understand that the value is the adolescent.
Exactly.
The key value is the value of that person. So, for example, let me give you the example of life. Life's important. So every city will spend millions of dollars on hospitals because life's important. We'll spend millions of dollars on ambulances, and we'll create these networks so that we can preserve life. Around those principles, we have standards, like speed limits, like you have to get a driver's license when you get a car because you don't want you to drive irresponsibly. So those standards are there because life's important. Around the standards, we have rules. If you break the speed limit, you get a fine. If you break the speed limit too many times, you lose your license. Why? Because life's important and you could hurt yourself or somebody else. So we need to go back to that core value to understand why the rules exist. So the core value of adolescence, or the value of a person, that's the core value. Around that person, we build principles, and that is the principle of investing, social capital, social scaffolding. Let's invest in that young person. They're a valuable, precious jewel in our hands. Around those principles are standards. So let's build around that young person time, skills, the principle of 5 to 7 mentors. And around those standards are rules. So we have child safety protection rules. We have clubs where there's rules, but those clubs exist to help a young person grow and develop. So let's think about the core value of the person, and when we have to talk about the rules they're breaking, let's never forget that that person's soul is at stake as well.
That's an extremely important message, and that's what our adolescents need. Thank you very much, NIK, for sharing your expertise with us. Thank you for helping us with that.
It's been good to share.